Hey everybody! I have been trying to make a good batch of kippered steak for a while now, and I've gotten really close to nailing it, and everything I've made has been plenty good, but not what I'd consider to be perfect. But I learn a little bit each time, and my last batch was so close that I think that this batch is gonna be the one. I'm making this kippered beefsteak that I'll try at the end of the video. So let's get started. So I've got some real lean beef here. This is some top round, and the first thing I'm gonna do is to trim out the excess fat, and then I'm gonna beat the out of it with the old 54 teeth of terror. I'm gonna cut this into some pretty hefty strips. Take a look here. That's about 1 inch wide. So I'm cutting these into kind of 1/2 inch wide by 1/2 inch thick strips, and I'll try to get them as even as I can. Those are pretty hefty. I'm doing kind of a small batch today, so I've got 4 pounds of meat, and I'm gonna use 2 cups of water for the brine. So the total weight is gonna be 6 pounds. That's meat and brine combined. And using that weight, I'll add 1.5 teaspoons of salt per pound, or 7 grams per pound to be more accurate. So this is 42 grams of plain salt. And that is kind of middle of the road as far as saltiness. The range for saltiness is fairly narrow between being too salty and being too bland. And I always shoot for between 2 and 3% salt content by weight. This is just under 2.5%. But I'm gonna be adding in some soy sauce, so that's gonna help bring it up just a little bit to where I like it. Sweetness, however, is completely subjective, and it can range from a purely savory jerky with no sweetener at all the way out to that meat candy that you find at the grocery store. But I really can't stand that stuff, but that's the only jerky that most people will ever know, so I get why people like it. I use around 1 cup of sugar for every 10 pounds of total weight, and that's not going to be particularly sweet after it works its way through that much meat and brine. But I don't stick to that as a rule, and I'll use twice that much or even more if I want a really sweet meat. So this is 1/2 cup of white sugar today. And you can use whatever kind of sugar you want. I'll let you know that honey and maple syrup are fine to use, but those can be pretty spendy, and you won't really get a lot of the flavor of the honey or maple if you put it in the brine. If you want to taste those notes, you'll do better by adding it at the end after it comes out of the brine and just before you smoke or dehydrate it. So go ahead and use these if you want to, or if you're avoiding refined sugar. But if you want to save some of that sweet cash money, use an inexpensive white or brown sugar in your brine, and then add the spendy stuff as a topping. Salt and sugar brine makes pretty good jerky on its own, but I'm going to add in a little bit of flavor with 1/2 cup of soy sauce. And that's going to add a little more salinity, and that's going to give that a little umami boost. And I always like a little bit of heat, so I'll throw in a couple of teaspoons of cayenne pepper. Now I'll stir this until that salt and sugar are completely dissolved, and then we'll do a little taste test. Add some smoke, and that's gonna be really, really good. With most jerky, the salt and low water content are what preserves the meat, but I want this one to stay moist in the center, so I'm gonna need to use cure to preserve it. And this pink cure number 1 goes in at a rate of 1.1 grams per pound, or about 1 teaspoon for every 5 pounds of meat and brine combined. So for my 6-pound batch here today, I'm gonna need 6.6 grams of cure. And you'll want to make sure you do all of your taste testing before you add this to the mix, because once this goes in, tasting is off limits until it's had time to react with the meat, and that's going to take at least 12 hours. So again, I'll just stir this and make sure that is completely dissolved. Now, brine and the meat go together. That is plenty of brine for this much meat. I'll just stir these together very well. Make sure everybody gets coated. Then I'll press this down to make sure everything stays down in that brine. Very good. And now this goes into the refrigerator to cure for at least a couple of days with those thick pieces of meat. But I'm going to give it 4 or 5 days because I think that extra long cure is going to help to tenderize this a little bit more and give it a better texture. So I'll check in on it at a couple of days, give it a good stir, and then I'll put it back in there and let it go for 2 or 3 more. Check out that bright red color. And that is from the cure doing its job. Now, unlike jerky that I normally dehydrate, kippered steak is always going to be smoked. So let's start getting this ready for the smoker by getting all of this liquid off, and then we'll start drying it out. Now, since dry surfaces soak up smoke better than wet surfaces, I want to get these dried out pretty well before I put them in the smoker. That's going to begin by just patting them dry with some paper towels. And now I'll continue to let these dry here in the sausage closet. I got the fan going so we got some good air circulation, and I'll leave these here at room temperature for about an hour. So after an hour out there with the fan on, these are fairly dry now. They're just a little bit tacky. You can see I'm not really picking up any moisture off those. So now is when I'm going to add my toppings, and that's going to give these a lot more flavor. Adding the toppings is completely optional. I could go right into the smoker just like this, and I'd come out with something that's really delicious. But I want to enhance the flavor just a little bit, so I'm going to add a couple of simple toppings. And I'm going to start with some honey. And you might be thinking that's counterintuitive, seeing as though I just went through the effort of getting the surface of the meat all nice and dry. But honey doesn't actually have any water content, and that's one of the reasons why it lasts forever. So adding a little honey in here is not going to be adding any moisture at all. And I don't want too much, I just want to glaze each piece just a little bit, so that's probably going to be around 2 or 3 tablespoons. And now I'm going to throw in a tablespoon or so of some coarse ground black pepper, because beef and pepper are delicious together. And we'll just mix that all around really good. Try to get every piece coated. Now we'll just rack this up. I did hit my rack with just a wee bit of cooking spray to keep this a little bit neater. Now we've come out to the smoker, and this is a low smoker right now. It's 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I've got some water down in the water pan for some humidity, and these are fairly small pieces of meat, so they're not going to take a lot of time to soak up some good smoke flavor. So I'll probably give them 2 hours up to 3 hours to get all smoky, and then I'll cut the smoke And then we're gonna raise the temperature, and we're actually gonna cook these off rather than let them continue to dry. So much more like I would make a sausage than I do my jerky. So here they are after about 2.5 hours smoking at 150. They've got a real nice color going on, and they've definitely taken on enough smoke flavor by now. And you can feel they're pretty soft still. They're definitely not cooked through or too dried out. So now, rather than continuing to dry these at that low temperature like I would with regular jerky, I'm actually going to cook these off to try to preserve a lot of that moisture inside and keep them nice and tender. And I'm going to do that by raising the temperature of the smoker to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. This will get them cooked fairly quickly, and luckily these pieces of meat are big enough that I can fit a temperature probe down into the middle of one and keep an eye on that temperature. This has been going for a couple hours at 170, and it's only hit an internal temperature of 140 degrees, but it feels just about right. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off right there. Now all I need to do is let this cool all the way down, and we can give it a try. And it's nice and cold and stormy out here today, so I'm just going to push this back in the smoker and leave the door open, and that should cool off pretty quickly. Kippers and kippering actually refer to certain kinds of smoked fishes, and I'm not sure who decided to apply the term to red meat, or maybe it's just a colloquial thing, but what I know as kippered steak is this kind of thick and more tender jerky. The outside is dried out, but the inside is still kind of moist, so it's easy to bite through. Now it's finally time to see if I nailed it or failed it. The color is really nice and red, and it's still got some flexibility to it. Now let's slice one open and take a look inside. Oh yeah, nice and red all the way through, and it seems pretty moist. At least compared to this. This is my normal jerky, and this is really good for packing around. It's very dehydrated. I always want to look for those white fibers when I pull apart a piece of this. And this is great for packing around because it's so much lighter than this and doesn't add a lot of weight to your pack. But this one is going to give your jaw quite a workout. Well, this looks and feels just about right. Of course, what really matters is the taste. Check out that bite. Meaty. Wow, really nice flavor. You know, too much smoke can really easily overpower small pieces of meat like this, but this has got a nice light smokiness to it, so I can really taste the meat. And that's a very good thing. The flavor is pretty straightforward. It's a little bit salty, a little bit sweet, and a little bit spicy. If you're to buy this in a big old bag, it might be called original or classic or something similar to that. But the texture is what I was really working on with this one, and I think I finally nailed it. It's kind of stiff on the outside like my other jerky there, but as you bite through it, the center kind of gives way, and it's nice and easy to get through and then to chew. And it's not gummy like some of the tailor-made stuff can be. You can easily get carried away with this, and then a little bit later, when this kind of hydrates and swells up in your stomach, you're gonna be hurting. As is the case with many things in cooking and in life, pulling it out at the right time is the key to getting it right. I was checking on this a lot to make sure I didn't overcook it, and had I taken it to the 155 degrees like I'd planned, it would have been too dry. Still been good though. And it turned out that 140 was the temp to hit with this one, and that's gonna be perfectly safe because of the cure that we put into the brine. So when you're making this, keep an eye on it, and remember, there's nothing wrong with giving your meat a little tug and a squeeze here and there, and then pull that out when it's got the feel that you're after. And now I've got a good starting recipe and technique, so the next time I make this, I'll be looking at adding in some additional flavors. But this is tremendously good as is, and I'm very happy with the results. So, whether you call this jerky or whether you call it kippered steak, I really hope you try it, and I know you're gonna love it. Thanks for watching.